And it looks like Feline is in the process of going off here. She is a very well-known High Tide player. She has a Legacy Open win in Seattle a couple of years back that I got to cover. What is very nice is she is by far the fastest High Tide player I've ever watched on camera. Very efficient with her actions, and High Tide is a pretty ponderous deck, can take a while to go off, especially if you're not familiar with the operations, but Feline, with her mixture of familiarity with her deck and the shortcuts she uses, is able to navigate this game pretty quickly.
And as you can see, if we're getting Blue Sun Zenith is only out of the sideboard. It looks like what has already happened here during this game is, I'm not positive we actually have resolved the time spiral in the situation. With this many candlesticks, she's probably just using them to draw a lot, like to just use a mana advantage to draw her entire deck one time through. Whenever possible, you would prefer to not cast Time Spiral while comboing off, but she has Steve tapped out, and it looks like she has no shortage of mana. This also could be a Cunning Wish for Turnabout to untap the candles and make even more mana. And right now she has 13 floating, and I believe she still plays, we were talking about her lists earlier today, she still plays a Turnabout in the Wish board, and yeah, not even going for that. She's looking like she might be going for Blue Pact,
giving some insurance against some potential Force of Wills here. Now, Steve Guillerm on the other side of the table here, he is playing a Food Chain combo deck. Basically, the way that this deck works is you get Food Chain into play, you manipulate Fate for Miss Hollow Griffins, that generates infinite mana. You can win the game a number of ways from there. Tide Sprout Tyrant is the easiest. You can also just kind of win with good value creatures. There's Charlotte's Agent, Baleful Strix, Vendilion Click, and so forth. So the easiest way to win is to combo through Food Chain plus Miss Hollow Griffin being the key synergy. And then there's sort of some backup and secondary plans that can afford you as well.
And this is why Feline got the pact. We see Blue Sun Zenith for 17 is trying to resolve. Steve tried to force it. It was Flusterstormed. He tried to force it again, and the pact negation that she wished for countered the second Force of Will.
Feline's been doing a lot of traveling for the Open Series in recent months. He's kind of been all around, kind of making a run quietly towards one of the 8 slots for the Players' Championship at the end of the year. Has not had a big finish yet in the Legacy portion. Has had some tough tournaments, you know. The Rug Delver and similar matchups can be a little rough, and you're going to run into those several times over the course of your average Legacy tournament, but most matchups are pretty positive for High Tide, especially when you are as familiar with the deck as Feline is.
Yeah, she had a good finish in Milwaukee this year with High Tide, so she's established some points. One of the things is she doesn't sign up. She only plays Legacy. She doesn't actually play the standard half of the Opens, so she's going to need a string of large finishes to qualify for Players' Championship.
Yeah, I've been screaming at her to play in the standard Opens. She's played in the last 2. Yeah. I don't know if she's top 64 yet.
Yeah, she's played Burn in Milwaukee, didn't top 64 with it, and there we go. That game 1 is going to go Feline's way.
Yeah, so pretty straightforward stuff. Steve's list really doesn't offer a ton of disruption, really just 4 copies of Force of Will and a misdirection. And that's not going to be enough to stop High Tide unless you have a lot of pressure, and Steve's deck is a little bit on the cumbersome side with how long it takes to go off.
As unusual of a matchup as this is, we actually got to see this matchup play out a couple times with Colin Chilbert in about a month ago in Dallas. This is, as far as I can tell, and from my playing of High Tide, this is a pretty good matchup for High Tide. Food Chain is not a fast combo deck. What it has going for it is it has a great plan B in the fact that it actually just plays creatures. It plays 3/3 flyers that some decks are ill-equipped to deal with. It's not fast enough to win through High Tide, and it's not really controlling enough to try to play defense against High Tide.
Yeah, combo decks like Food Chain, the big advantage they have is stability. It's really hard for their draws to just fail because there's just enough normal Magic cards to play a conventional game plan against most people. That leaves you usually ineffective in other combo decks that are much more streamlined or much faster. So that's what you saw in that first game.
And High Tide actually it's interesting because it's a combo deck in the same realm. It's also a high stability, low speed combo deck, but it has a more singular goal. It's playing all the cantrips in Legacy as opposed to playing 3/3 flyers for 4.
Now the difference here is that a deck like Feline's is a lot easier to hate out in sideboarded games, whereas Steve is, he's pretty stable. Again, there's not really any card that someone's going to sideboard in where he's going to say, I just can't beat that thing. Whereas in games 2 and 3, Feline has to play against a lot of Get Octis and Aethersworn Canoness and Flusterstorms and troublesome cards for combo decks. So moving on to the sideboard here, Steve's list: 2 copies of Grafdigger's Cage, 2 Pithing Needles, 2 Golgari Charms, 2 copies of Submerge, Numazawa's Jitte, 2 copies of Abrupt Decay, and 4 copies of Meddling Mage. The 4 copies of Meddling Mage are for sure coming in. It's about
Exactly.
it's a mixture of disruption and pressure. Exactly what Steve needs, more of that on both fronts. So Meddling Mage does a lot of good work there. I'm not sure if he's going to want to bring in Needle or Abrupt Decay to fight over Candelabra of Talnos, but that's another angle that he has afforded to him if he decides that some of his main deck cards aren't very good.
Yeah, so originally you don't want to fight over Candelabras when playing against High Tide. The build that Feline's on today, and this has become one of the more trendy things with High Tide, is she's running 4 Sensei's Divining Top in the cantrip slot. So the Pithing Needle may actually be okay to board in. The Abrupt Decay probably is not good for this matchup.
So High Tide is a deck that you have a fair bit of experience with. What do you think of the copies of Sensei's Divining Top?
So Sensei's Divining Top, that's something that I've recently started to run. They're good. So the deck is, I think it's going the correct direction for the deck. One of the things that High Tide has trouble with is it's not one of the faster combo decks. So it needs to become more of a controlling deck. And Sensei's Divining Top is inefficient, but gives great card selection. And if you want to go the slow control route with the deck, kind of a control combo deck, then I think Sensei's Divining Top's really going in the right direction. Feline actually is doing something really interesting today, which I haven't seen tried out yet. I've experimented with it, like, in theory, but she's playing, because you only get 6 sideboard slots in High Tide, you play a 9-card Wish board. She's actually playing counterbalances out of the sideboard to actually really embrace that combo control role. It's because of that she's upped from 2 Divining Tops to 4, so that she can actually do a countertop impersonation in certain matchups.
And that's to bring in against soft permission decks, or what?
Faster combo decks most of the time. Say Elf Combo, that's a deck that can beat you very easily. They're just faster. However, if you were to land top into counterbalance, you're probably a favorite against Elf Combo all of a sudden.
Sure.
And our game's underway, so a Verdant Catacombs for Steve. Feline's just going to start on a Preordain and slowly set up her hand.
Probably a land light opening hand there. She shipped a cantrip to the bottom and took a land.
Yeah, cantrips, like, as long as she has the combo pieces, lands are really where it's at. How the matchup plays out is that Steve doesn't get to go for the combo in this matchup by and large. He can never afford to tap out. What he can do is make Noble Hierarchs, he can make Shardless Agents, and get somewhere around 3 to 6 power on the battlefield. And he wants to put Feline on as fast of a clock as possible. Remember, she has actual no defensive cards, so even a Grizzly Bear, that's 2 damage every turn. And once he does that, Feline's going to wait till the last possible turn and attempt to combo on it.
Yep.
It's kind of a classic aggro versus control matchup. The downside is that Steve's not normally just an aggro deck. And we'll see Meddling Mage cast for Steve.
Imagine the first one goes on High Tide would be my guess, but we'll see momentarily.
Yeah, it could be High Tide. There are some bounce spells, enough bounce spells that you can't actually like Meddling Mage out all the bounce. You could the way you'd want to do it is by naming Cunning Wish. Out of the board, Feline has access to Snap and Wipe Away. People like which bounce spell really depends on who you're playing against. Some, you can see Snap, you can see Snap Back, you can see Wipe Away, you can see Echoing Truth, you can see Repeal. These are all reasonable cards.
There is Crispicula's very popular invitational card many moons ago.
Yeah. Steve has decided to name Time Spiral with the first Meddling Mage. That's decent. He may want to have named High Tide because that's what will allow her to do any fast combo. Mm-hmm. You still can with enough turnabouts. You don't actually need Spiral to combo out.
You can see Feline here looking at a ponder, keeping and drawing the card Time Spiral. So not really worried about this Meddling Mage right now.
Broken Sleeve's going to go ahead and replace one of those. And Steve starts his clock. Like I said, even a Grizzly Bear is 2 damage every turn, and that's exactly what he has. Meddling Mage swings for 2.
And he's just going to combo a lot slower than Feline in this matchup, so some amount of creature damage is going to have to be involved in all of this.
Yeah, I don't even think he's going to combo at all. I don't think he'll ever... It doesn't seem to me like he ever gets... In this matchup, I've never seen Fujian get to the point where they actually can combo.
Just trying to win with a smattering of random dudes.
Well, right here, he has Shardless Agent. This is turn 3. It's going to cascade into presumably another creature. Well, here, Brainstorm, but even with 4 power, right? Feline's on probably a 4-turn, like it's technically a 5-turn clock, but it's probably a 4-turn clock.
Sure.
He's going to cast the Brainstorm, and I imagine that he's going to shuffle away the Emrakul.
So quick read here on Food Chain. I'm a little surprised to see Steve not just go for a second Meddling Mage that turn.
He has one in his hand?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm wondering whether or not you'd even just board out your Food Chain, as odd as that sounds. I'm just not convinced it can happen.
Sure.
Feline Fluster Storms the Brainstorm. You see Merchant Scroll. She does have both High Tide and Time Spiral in hand, so she does have the combo. Things she wants to find, she'd like to find more lands. She'd like to find a bounce spell. If she's finding Force of Will, that means she already has those things.
This is a sign of strength right here.
Yes.
And the willingness to Flusterstorm the Brainstorm last turn too, just saying, I kind of have it all. I just want to keep you off of finding something that could disrupt all of this.
It's not the strongest Merchant Scroll. The biggest sign of strength would be if she had got a Pact of Negation or a Flusterstorm, because those are kind of spells that can only be used offensively. That to me would say, I already have the combo and the defensive, I already have the combo and the bounce spell, and I don't care about what you're going to cast. This at least acknowledges that there are some spells in Steve 75 that she would not like him to resolve right now.
You are saying I have an opponent. When you go get Force of Will, there's a human being on the other side of the table.
When you're saying Fluster, you're saying you're not even an opponent anymore. I'm going to counter your, I'm not even going to look at what your cards are. So Steve is starting with a Brainstorm. As you said, he does have a Meddling Mage. It looks like he has access to 2 more Meddling Mages now. So he can try to hate out all of her bounce spells. Now, like I said, there's this guessing game. There's about 5 bounce spells that she could theoretically be playing.
Yep. It's tough. I always, I played with cards like Cranial Extraction and Meddling Mage against these decks, and I always feel a large amount of uncertainty when I'm playing them against Cunning Wish combo decks, because they're so redundant, and you're never sure what's the one. You
kind of just want to name Cunning Wish and then hope that they don't have one in the main.
That's what I did at the Extended Pro Tour many moons ago.
Did it work?
My opponent killed me the following turn.
Okay. So he had one of the bounce spells in the main.
I can't even recall what happened, but I know in playtesting I cast Cranial Extraction naming Cunning Wish, and my playtest opponent would concede, and then I did it at the Pro Tour, my opponent said sure, and then killed me. That's when I knew that our testing went off the rails a little bit. This does not simulate real life experiences.
Yeah. All right, Feline playing a Polluted Delta, Merchant Scroll for Cunning Wish. Redeciding on Cunning Wish. Wipe Away. So yeah, like I said, the bounce spells that you could actually, there's like 6, so it could be Wipe Away. He now knows that 1 exists, but you could see Wipe Away, you could see Snap, you could see Snap Back, see Echoing Truth, Repeal, or Chain of Vapor, all as reasonable bounce spells.
Although this gives a lot of extra value to that second Meddling Mage now in Steve's hand. He knows what the bounce spell in question is.
Yeah. Well, the danger here is, so say he plays Meddling Mage and names Wipe Away.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's still this problem that Feline can win without Time Spiral.
Well,
she can just like get 6 islands, cast 2 High Tides, a Candlestick, and then start blue sunning.
Well, that's going to be challenging to do in the time frame that Steve's giving her at this point. I mean, we're looking at 4 points of damage this turn, knocking her down to 10. Another 2-power creature, so 2.5. 2 or 3 turns likely. It's going to be hard for Feline to assemble a hand that good under that level of pressure.
Yeah, it's not easy, but it's doable, especially with this fetch land and this divining top. Like, the amount of card selection is very real here.
And this is another strong play for Steve here.
He's going to cast Vendilion Click. And that's going to get Force of Will pitching Brainstorm. She does not want to lose one of her combo pieces right now. And her hand is Wipe Away Time Spiral Time Spiral High Tide. So her plan right now is very simple. Wipe away the Meddling Mage, cast Spiral Tide.
So Steve's going to fight over this. He really wants to get this click into play, which makes a lot of sense because it cuts the clock in half. Now it's 7 power in play against an opponent at 13. And of course, Vendilion Click, great for getting information with this Meddling Mage and just taking one of Feline's valuable pieces.
Now this is interesting. Feline's going to fetch with the misdirection on the stack. She really wants to fight this counter war. There were 2 options here. She could let herself get clicked and then use the fetch land and the islands to just manipulate her draws, or she can fight the counter war. she's choosing to fight a counter war, and that's a little risky because it's basically force of will or nothing. And she needs all 3 of the cards in her hand anyway. I would have been inclined, I think, to let V-Click resolve and use my card selection to rebuild. But there's not much time to do that. As you mentioned, it is a 2-turn clock.
Yeah. This is just a very difficult spot for Feline.
And she did find a force of will, and she's going to force back again. This time, we'll see what she's pitching. She has to pitch the Spiral or the Tide or the Wipe Away. And
they're all necessary.
I think, yes, I was going to say, I think it's the Spiral because it's Meddling Maged.
And as you mentioned, there's still some hope of her being able to win manual style outside of Time Spiral.
Yeah, if you're Steve, though, and you know how the deck works, like, so there's a Wipe Away. I mean, so you either name Wipe Away or you get the Wipe Away out of her hand. You should be able to, with reasonable certainty, know that her last card is Tide. So we'll go for another. And he actually has 2 more Meddling Mages. He can't play them both. But he can play them one at a time. He's going to do Meddling Mage number 1.
And I'm sure this is not an uncommon experience here for Feline of comfortably winning the first game and then playing against a sea of hate cards in post-board games.
It looks like this one's on Wipe. Yeah, that one's on Wipe Away. So there will be no Time Spirals. But remember, she doesn't actually need Time Spiral anymore. He's going to play Deathray Shaman. So it still is a 2-turn clock.
No, now it's 1 turn. I mean, she fell to 7 on that hit.
She fell to 7. Okay, yeah, that's 1 turn. And she's drawing Sensei's Divining Top. No outs there.
So Meddling Mage, Vendilion Click, Force of Will, Misdirection. Steve showed a lot more relevant action in that second game.
There were outs. They weren't good. She could have upkeep. She could, like, on 4 lands, cast High Tide, cast Sensei's Divining Top, 7 mana floating, and then just, like, started trying to go for it. And I do not think it would get there, but there's a chance.
It's actually one of the tougher things about playing against Time Spiral in the tournament setting is it's not a combo deck like Sneak and Show where, yeah, I'm just dead. There's always that fraction of a % chance that they might fizzle, just draw 7 lands or something.
Right.
So you're just sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting, even though doom is often inevitable.
That's why it's painful to play against, to play against High Tide when the person is still learning the deck. Because
for sure.
Then, like, at least with Feline, like, she knows whether or not she's gotten there. So it's like, and I'll do that sometimes while playing High Tide. I haven't played the deck much recently, so I'm starting to lose this edge. But when you're comboing, like, once she knows she has it, there's a thing where you just start comboing with your hand face up, just to, like, to basically let your opponent decide how long this has to go. And you can work through those steps a lot quicker when you know, like, you know when to tank and when not to.
Yeah. And if you watch, when Feline's going off, the hand, when she's drawing a pile of cards, is split just into relevant, non-relevant action. Just lands and things along those lines. Those get set to the side, and additional cantrips or action cards get set face up. So, like you mentioned, the opponent has more information on when to tap the mat.
Right. So see here, we're on to game 3. Feline will be back on the play. And though it's 1-1, I still think that Feline's a pretty heavy favorite. The biggest card that Steve can use in the matchup is Meddling Mage. He happened to have 3 of them that game.
Yeah.
And that was fortunate on his side.
Vendilion Click is another very powerful tool here as well.
Yeah, it is, I believe, a 1 of in his deck.
Yeah, there's 1 copy, none on the sideboard.
Yeah,
but
he's just got a lot of cards that don't really do anything. Cards like Manipulate Fate, a strange card that's actually usually pretty good. It gets you a ton of card advantage and a ton of resiliency. These are things that just don't matter in the matchup.
Yeah. Just all about just beaters with text boxes that prevent Feline from casting spells in some capacity. That's all the game is about from Steve. His fastest, most explosive food drain draws may be able to get it done, but that's not going to be the way this game gets played.
Yeah, and Feline has counter spells on top of it, so even his fastest, most explosive draws probably don't resolve.
I would imagine that there's some argument here for Steve just removing his food chains, Emrakul, and Tidesprout Tyrant altogether and just trying to become... I guess at that point he has to get rid of the Manipulate Fates as well. Maybe that's just too many sideboard slots.
That's what I would do in his situation, I think. I would board in even these, like, only so-so cards, Pithing Needle, sure, like, Abrupt Decay, Meddling Mage. Just board, like, if you can afford to, I'd board out the combo.
Yep. It looks like it's too many slots. It's 9 cards, so he doesn't have 9 reasonable cards to bring in.
All right, so far just lands traded. Feline with no cantrips, just 2 islands. there's some danger to that if you're Steve, as that does suggest that she has a pretty good hand. He's going to go for turn 2 Meddling Mage in response. Feline Brainstorms. And she may or may not fight over this card. It really depends. We already have seen that Steve believes the first name against the deck to be Time Spiral. I can't imagine why that would change. So if Feline has a hand of, say, Candelabra, Candelabra, High Tide, or maybe High Tide, High Tide, Candelabra, I would probably let Meddling Mage resolve.
Well,
we're not on her turn. She can't.
Yeah, this is in response to the Brainstorm. Yeah, now there's a Meddling Mage in play.
Oh, and that's awkward. Now he could name Divining Top.
All right, so we'll find out what's happening here momentarily. If Steve names Divining Top, this could still be kind of a win for Feline, right? Yeah. He probably needs to just name a more critical piece and not some random value play with this Meddling Mage.
No, I'm not positive. Divining Top's not a bad name. Depends what the rest of his hand is.
Yeah.
And it looks like it's still Time Spiral, but we'll get a confirmation on that.
Okay.
Yeah. Like I said, I do think the first name against the deck is not Time Spiral. I do think it's High Tide.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she doesn't actually need Spiral to combo. It's harder, but if she just makes land drops and gets some candlesticks, she can make enough mana to not need Spiral. As the deck becomes more controlling, Spiral does become a more important card, though. Let's see, on Steve's turn, Noble Hierarch. Pre-combat, that will increase his clock, so Feline's down to 17.
So do you think if Steve knows there's a fetch land in Feline's hand, that's the tipping point where he would name Divining Top with the Meddling Mage? She's going to get a lot of looks here.
Yeah, it depends what kind of follow-up he has. I imagine she doesn't need too many cards because she didn't keep hand with too much cantrip action.
And she is taking her time here, just playing lands and saying go so far.
Yeah, I think you need to name High Tide, as that's the card that slows her down most.
And Steve has just picked up a second copy of Meddling Mage. That's a big draw here.
Yeah. He has Shardless Agent and a land, so he can go Shardless Agent. He has a lot of plays available to him here. And it's going to be Shardless Agent cascades into Noble Hierarch. Now Meddling Mage swings for 4.
And Steve is doing all this with Force of Will back up, so.
And Cunning Wish on end step for Feline. This may be the turn she wants to go for. I would imagine she just gets the blue sun out of the board, and actually she's boarded out her candlesticks, it looks like. So she's a lot more reliant.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, that's worse. That means she may start a turn on High Tide, like with a couple High Tides, then play the bounce spell, and then play the Time Spiral all in one turn.
Yeah, it looks like she has Snap in hand, so that's a freebie. That's actually better than a freebie she has High Tide.
I'm thinking this is the last turn of the game, based on that play. I would imagine, yeah, High Tide, float 4, Snap, untapping, floating 2, tapping for 6, Spiral with 2 floating, and packed this Force of Will.
So to your point earlier about what to name with the Meddling Mage, if Steve names High Tide, it at least saves some amount of mana.
Well, imagine, yeah, so it saves some mana.
Or rather prevents the Feline from generating more mana.
I mean, the problem is Snap is excellent against Hate Bears. So even if he names High Tide, then she just pays 2, snaps the Meddling Mage, plays High Tide, spirals. Actually, still with 2 floating. It would be, if she has the Spiral, it's exactly the same both ways. Both ways, she ends up with a Spiral with High Tide on 2 and 2 floating over the top. But she doesn't have it yet. She plays the 5th land and passes back. Well, there's 2 situations. Either one, she doesn't have it, or worse for Steve, she has it and just wants another card.
It's risky to give Steve another draw step, though. I mean, he's represented quite a few powerful disruptive cards.
Yeah, and I want to point out, this is a mistake here of what Steve has done by tapping his lands this way. Normally, you tap your lands first. He actually wants to be paying for that with Noble Hierarchs, because when Feline combos off, there's a good chance she'll resolve 2 High Tides and would give him the ability to hard cast one. Right now he has 2 Force of Wills and 1 blue card, so it's only 1 counterspell. But if he left up both Tropicals, he could hard cast a Force of Will and pitch to the other one, and he'd have 2 counters for the fight.
Yeah, keep in mind that High Tide rather is symmetrical. Decks both players, so that's something that comes up a fair bit when High Tide is playing against decks with counterspells.
That's what makes the mirror match really fun, by the way.
I'm sure the mirror match is gruesome.
It's great. It's just great. It's just like a big game of chess.
So Steve in the process here of resolving Steve is in the process here of resolving food chain. This is sort of the linchpin combo piece of the deck. We've seen this card appear in decks like Goblins and other various combo strategies over the years. You can exile any creature to get that much mana +1, only usable to cast creatures.
So what this does is with Mist Hollow Griffin, it adds infinite mana, which then casts an Emrakul. That is the general plan of the deck. Like I said before, though, just doesn't do much in this matchup.
It is kind of a bootleg birthing pod. It's birthing pod if you already have all the cards in your hand.
It's like, so my guess here is like, so he plays Meddling Mage. I like playing Meddling Mage. I still think he'd wanted to play Meddling Mage off the Hierarchs and just not play Food Chain. And what Feline's doing here is awesome. She's Pact of Negationing the Meddling Mage on Steve's turn, which means she's going to have to, during upkeep, High Tide. And start comboing then. There we go. So now islands are tapping for 2. This is the turn. I'm not sure she has it.
Steve's looking at a Force of Will right now.
Yeah, but only 1 Force of Will.
Yeah. But I think he's thinking about picking his battle here over the High Tide.
Yeah, I do think, I'm not sure that Feline tapped Divining Top, spun top on end step. Which, maybe she knows what the top card is. I don't think that happened though. He's gonna Force of Will, pitching Force on the High Tide.
And I like this use of Force of Will by Steve. Feline definitely needs this High Tide to resolve to go off this turn, and also needs this High Tide to resolve just to not lose the game. So
yeah, she has to fight here, if she can.
And it's better to make her fight before the High Tide resolves than after, because she has so many more resources to work with after the fact.
Yes. Just gonna float for turnabout, targeting herself. I don't think she has it, so what's going to happen here, she was planning to just go for use Turnabout and High Tide to make a bunch of mana and just draw cards and not Spiral. But she's untapping her lands, and that gives her the mana to tap and Paper Pact. That Turnabout being used as a really bad ritual. +1. Yep, she's going to pay for Pact Negation. Counterspell resolves. Draws for turn. She has 1 turn to reload and go for it again. A land will help. It'll certainly help her set up something with top. And we'll see where she goes from here.
And Steve appears to be out of disruption at this point. I mean, his hand is just a Food Chain and a Shardless Agent, I believe.
Well, yeah. He pitched Force to Force. So had he pitched Shardless Agent to Force, he would have another counterspell now. I don't think he expected the game to go another turn.
Yeah.
I think he was trying to set up for a longer fight. But
it's hard to read the situation to be this is going to involve a turnabout to untap 1 land to pay for Pact. I'm not sure the last card in his hand is Shardless Agent, but I believe there's at least a Food Chain left over in all of this.
And he's going,
oh my. He's just casting Emrakul off of Food Chain?
He said he can sack all his creatures and cast Emrakul. Does that work? Does he have enough?
So he has 3 plus, so Meddling Mage is 3, Shardless Agent gets it up to 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. The Hierarchs tap 12, 13. Yeah, he's just casting Emrakul.
Making 15 mana, sacking his whole team, casting Emrakul.
An unexpected turn of events.
Yeah. Well, that's what I get for saying you should board out the combo. He's going to win with it. Kind of.
Well,
it's not really. The combo usually involves Mist Hollow Griffin, not just like sack all my things. But
it's kind of the combo.
All right. That's going to do it.
Yeah, he has enough mana here.
I mean, she's dead. She has a Spiral and a Snap in her hand. And had Feline been able to untap this turn, I do believe she would have won.
Well, certainly if she finds a High Tide off of this Liquid Sensei Divine Top, it's not even close.
Yeah, I mean, even so, if you just get to start the game with a turn with 6 islands in play, Snap, untap your 2 islands, and then just like Spiral with 0 tides, drawing a new 7, like you're probably good from there.
Yep.
But you're not good when your opponent takes the next turn, annihilates all your lands, and you're at -3. She's gonna spin the top. I don't think there's anything that works here.
Well, she doesn't have any way to stifle the trigger.
No.
Only 1 mana left over. Can't counter the Emrakul, obviously.
Yeah, and she can't even stifle the... Even if she could stifle the trigger, she'd... Well, I guess she could stifle the trigger, yeah. She'd have to blind draw into a stifle that's not in her deck.
Yeah, I don't think any of these are going to be a reprieve here.
And that's it. She's gets annihilated. Steve moves to 5-1.
And Feline with a little smile on her face there.
Really sure
Can't
what happened.
really believe that game ended that way. I mean, it felt like she set it up to the point where, like you mentioned, next turn she's a pretty heavy